I have been commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Morrison and Lieutenant Colonel McLeod, commanding officers of the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the Black Watch Highland Regiment of Canada, to inform the authorities of this church that they have repaired here today with the colors of the battalions, and request that they be deposited herein. Sir.
Inform Lieutenant Colonel Morrison and Lieutenant Colonel McLeod, commanding officers of the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the Black Watch Royal Highland Regiment of Canada, that every facility will be afforded them in executing their most laudable purpose.
The laying up of the colors marks the retirement from active service of the oldest and last of Canada's kilted regiments, the Black Watch, Royal Highland Regiment of Canada. This proud and colorful regiment, steeped in the history of Scotland's Imperial Black Watch, and for 108 years a living part of Canadian history, is being struck from the regular order of battle of the Canadian forces. With their passing, it seems unlikely we shall ever know their like again. Perhaps the greatest compliment we can pay is to paraphrase a name the enemy once gave them. The Ladies from Hell. A military presence in Canada dates back to the French regulars who came to colonial New France in 1604. Later, some of these regular foot soldiers were permitted to recruit their own irregular force to offset the main threat from Indian bands and an occasional threat from the English colonies to the south and overseas. Colorful in their 17th century uniforms, such units are the predecessors of modern-day militia units. After the 7 Years' War, when, like a pawn in a giant chess game, Canada became a British colony, the British Regular Army was responsible for colonial defense. The Imperial Black Watch landed and became the first British troops to see service in what is now Canada. Later, a war being fought half a world away in the Crimea caused Great Britain to reduce her North American garrisons to the extent that by the Militia Act of 1855, native Canadian troops began to form what would eventually become the Canadian Army. A baptism by fire came quickly, and as a counter to the threat of the Fenian raids on Montreal, a new military unit was born. It would soon be identified as the Black Watch, Royal Highland Regiment of Canada. .300, all ranks, won the first battle honor for the regiment in South Africa in that turn-of-the-century conflict, the Boer War. Canadian infantry units would win 4 Victoria Crosses. And then the Great War, 1914-18, the war to end all wars. It was an occasion of great national zeal. Canada had immediately pledged an expeditionary force of 25,000 men. In Montreal, the 13th Battalion, Royal Highland Regiment of Canada, was formed. They shipped to England in October, where they trained until February, then sailed for France and the trenches. The Canadians replaced the French in the bloody sector known as the Ypres salient, a 17-mile-long bulge in the German lines. Here, the Black Watch of Canada would soon be introduced to a new refinement in the art of killing.
Until April, we held a line of our own, and we went up to the Ypres salient. And that turned out to be our first battle. The gas attack at Ypres, which commenced on April the 22nd. The salient of Ypres, it's a circle right round the town, and it was the keys of the Channel ports, and for that reason was of first importance. It was the first time that gas had ever been used, and of course we had no gas masks, and the show started by very heavy shelling on these breastworks, which were very flimsy things, and they knocked them about pretty badly. And then at 4 o'clock on the Thursday afternoon, they let this gas out, chlorine gas, and being heavier than air, it just rolled over. The gas thing was, we didn't get the full effect of the gas, we got some of it. It affects your lung and your eyes and so forth. But the French got the full effect. French colonials got the full effect. Well, the line actually was broken for, I think, the best part of 5 miles. And, of course, the Germans got in behind us. And on the Friday night, that was all day Thursday night, Friday night, we were ordered to pull out there and form a new line. It was a very odd place, a trench called K5. It was a communication trench, actually. And the Germans were in the trench, and so were we. And there was just a sort of barricade there, and it was a hell of a mess, and I just happened to get hit, that's all.
You couldn't lie down, you couldn't do anything. It was just this eternal mud wherever you went. And it rained, and it was bitterly cold, and mud growing through these trenches and places where there were trenches. We got mud on our kilts, which froze for about 2 inches up on the hem, and we all had raw legs. The skin practically rubbed off your knees around there with these frozen kilts. They took them from us when we got back, and we went on truce for the rest of the winter, but every fellow was in an awful state. But these truce up there in that mud of Passchendaele, we should never be in. They never once thought of it. It was, first big drop was 92nd from Toronto, and they were a fine group of men. And then they had a number from the 132nd New Brunswick Infantry, and then we, the Nova Scotia Highland Brigade, made up practically the rest of the battalion. So there was very little representation from Montreal in it, although many of the officers did come from there. Now, as far as the lice went, seam squirrels we call them, a very regular thing when you got in your dugout after the day was to take off your kilt, which is very bad for them, and take a candle and run up and down the seams. We call them seam squirrels. And you run your candle up and down, that's the way you get clear of them.
World War I was a war of infantry, a war of attrition, where the great armies of the world came and stood face to face in bloody deadlock for 4 years. It was a conflict where the technical advances had outstripped the art of war as practiced by man. The results were a slaughter, which only serves to add to the esteem with which we must look upon the infantry soldier. This was trench warfare, where millions of men spent 4 years of their lives fighting over a few yards, not miles, but yards of French or Belgian countryside. It was said that Canada finally became a nation there on the bloody battlegrounds of France and Flanders. In all, during World War I, more than 11,000 Canadians wore the Black Watch tartan to battle. 2,613 Royal Highlanders of Canada would never return. They won enough military honors to fill a museum, some 931 various decorations for gallantry. The 3 Canadian Black Watch battalions won a total of 6 Victoria Crosses, a beautiful medal inscribed simply, for valor.
It's the outstanding gallantry medal of any army in the world, really, and is recognized as such by many countries. Well, to start with, this is Fred Fisher, who was killed winning the award during the gas attack at Ypres in 1915. He set up his machine gun and tried to stem the onslaught of the Germans on their breakthrough. Colonel Clark Kennedy he was sent to take command of our old friends, the 24th Victoria Rifles, and it was while he was in command of them that he was awarded the Victoria Cross. Denison on Fisher's right was a young Dane. He came out to this side of the water thinking to join the Americans, but he landed up here in Montreal and joined the reinforcing company we were forming at that time. Up on the left is Milton Gregg, and every Canadian knows who Gregg is. He was an original private in our 1st Battalion, the 13th, then got his commission and went to the Royal Canadian Regiment and won his BC with the Royal Canadian Regiment. The other two, Corporal Good and Private Crook, were awarded the cross for their gallantry at the Battle of Amiens. One of them was killed, and the other, Corporal Good, only died within recent months almost, down in New Brunswick. Those were our 6 VCs, and to commemorate their gallantry, we also have 6 tablets out on the drill floor, one for each of them.
For Canadians who left 60,000 maple leaf headstones in the cemeteries of France and Belgium in the First War, it must have seemed an incredibly short 21 years, and we were at war again with the old enemy of 1918. The spectacular invasion of the Normandy beaches in 1944 had been preceded by long, dark days training in England, preparing for their invasion of Hitler's Festung Europa, Fortress Europe. Watch, Royal Highland Regiment of Canada, spent nearly 4 frustrating years. A detachment of Black Watch took part in the Dieppe raid in 1942. We learned at Dieppe that would later save lives on the Normandy beaches. For the survivors of Dieppe, there would be another fight, another day. But for now, it was back to the south downs of England and still more training.
All the Allied forces in England became offensive-minded. We switched completely from a defensive role in the south of England to more active training on operations relating to attack and invasion. Equipment became much more plentiful. Training with tanks was begun. Combined operations were begun. And our battalion spent its winters in the south of England training in these roles, and the summers pretty much in Scotland on combined assault training. We had a very strong team, a first-class, top-notch battalion. The teamwork and the comradeship and the spirit within it couldn't have been better, but there was some impatience. After a number of years, we began to wonder whether D-Day would ever come. Black Watch was part of the 2nd Canadian Division, whose chief role throughout the war in northwest Europe was to break out of the bridgehead formed by others. We went into the beachhead some weeks after D-Day, and our responsibility, the divisional responsibility, was to break out of the beachhead and set up the basis for what turned out to be the Battle of Falaise and the ensuing battles in that part of the country. That was so later on in the crossing of the Rhine, and it was so at any operation where a beachhead had to be established or an assault crossing had to be made, succeeded by a breakout. It was a fluid type of warfare compared to World War I, and yet it was road-bound. It was fluid. It moved across all types of country, from beachheads to open fields, through the capture of small towns and cities, the crossing of tidal estuaries, which was one of our specialties, such as the Seine or the Rhine, by day or by night, fighting through woods like the Hochwald or the Reichswald, the great mass of arms and supplies and logistics that won the war generally had to come up over the main road network. And therefore, much of our fighting, many of the battles, were to gain control of major road networks.
Well, the Germans really respected the unit as the Canadian soldier, as a good fighting soldier, and especially we had the name of the Ladies from Hell, the battalion, and This was created at the beginning of the First World War, and it carried on into this one. And some of the old timers in the German Army brought that name back to light. This is what we were called, the Ladies from Hell. The first prisoners we took, they mentioned that they were told not to be taken prisoner by Canadian soldiers because they were all Indians and they would scalp them. When you have a family that sleep together and eat together and fight together, you have a real group there that you're very, very proud of.
Quite a familiar name, the Ladies from Hell. I presume it's something they'll never forget because they had the same in the First World War as they've had in the Second. And we made sure that they remembered it, too. It was a compliment. Though we weren't ferocious or anything like that, we were just the normal soldiers, but it gave us a sense of pride that we were remembered by elements of the First World War.
The Dieppe raid of August 1942 provided the first opportunity to test their training as an invasion force. In all, 5,000 Canadians took part. The Black Watch detachment seemed dogged by bad luck from the start. The enemy was alert and waiting. Casualties were severe in all units taking part. The Black Watch suffered a combination totaling 60% casualties. The raid considered a failure. It was a dark day for the Canadians. There would be another, brighter day at Dieppe. In September 1944, the Canadians had broken out of the beachhead. The 1st Battalion, Black Watch, re-entered Dieppe. It was all just part of a sweep across northwest Europe. But for Canada's Black Watch, the 3rd of September parade through Dieppe had a special significance.
We were unlucky enough to have the highest casualties of any battalion, any infantry battalion in the Canadian Army. I think that's possibly because we were first in the Falaise battle. Later, we were in Holland, where casualties were very serious. Later, from Nijmegen to the Rhine, very costly effort in casualties. And finally, in some of the major cities of northern Holland, the casualties were very severe. You cannot dwell upon the friends who aren't here today that were here yesterday. An infantryman is the man who must achieve the objective with all the supporting arms and help from every other service, but he is the man who must eventually capture the town, seize the hill, cross the river, clear the forest. And his life is so active, his duties so continuous that fatalism doesn't become a problem. I think the privilege of commanding my own battalion at the end of the war and bringing it back to Blurry Street, the home of the regiment in Canada, was certainly the greatest day in my military life. It was fantastic in that we arrived at the old Bonaventure station. We had very severe casualties, as we have mentioned. We had almost a full battalion of officers and men who had served with this battalion waiting for us, drawn up in line at the station. The city virtually shut down for the day. Offices were closed. The streets were crowded with people. The paper coming out of the office windows was a snowstorm. And we arrived at the Craig Street Grill Hall, where all the next of kin had been waiting for us almost all day, but there late in the afternoon for a final dismissal.
The ashes of World War II were hardly cold when a new conflict flared in a faraway corner of Asia. For 3 years, a bitter seesaw battle rolled through the hills of North and South Korea. The Canadians were involved as a component of the United Nations force. The Canadian Highland Battalion was en route to Korea when word flashed across the Pacific that the unit had been redesignated the 2nd Battalion, Black Watch of Canada. Aboard ship, all ranks were re-equipped with the red hackle, the Black Watch kilts, and new shoulder titles.
This was a tremendous feeling because, first of all, the Black Watch have a fabulous history, and secondly, for once we became one solidified unit. When we got to Korea, we became part of the British Commonwealth. We were on the order of battle, and the Canadian Brigade, as a matter of fact, were right at the, you might say, the sharp end, north of the Imjin River. We were right the center battalion with 3 RCR on our left flank and 3rd Royal 22nd on our right flank. And our duties were primarily to keep a watch on the demilitarized zone, which is right across our front, running from east to west, generally speaking. The Korean War had finished, at least the armistice was finished. The end of, or the armistice was signed, I should say, the end of July 1953. We were rather disappointed. I suppose it's not a nice thing to say, but we were all set to see some action. We didn't arrive in Korea until early in October, so that the fighting, for all intents and purposes, had finished, and we had a peacekeeping duty to fulfill.
What has come to be regarded as the highlight of the Canadian Black Watch Centennial in 1962 must surely be the visit of the Colonel-in-Chief of the regiment, Her Majesty the Queen Mother. Since her earliest association with the Canadian Black Watch, the Queen Mother had come to regard this as her regiment. The climax of the centennial was a presentation of new regimental colors to all 3 battalions of the Black Watch of Canada. There was standing room only in Molson Stadium in Montreal on that hot day in June of 1962.
The first time that the Black Watch came to Montreal was just over 2 centuries ago, in 1760. The virtues of hardihood, courage, and honor crossed the sea from Scotland and made new history in helping to build this great country of Canada. As I passed along your ranks just now, my thoughts turned to some of the battle honors which are emblazoned on your new colors. Names which mark deeds of heroic valor and endurance, which have brought luster to the history of our regiment. Today, the regiment is playing a full part in the defense of freedom, ready always for whatever task awaits. This will be the 3rd set of colors to be carried by the 3rd Battalion. For the 1st and 2nd Battalions, these are the first colors you have had. May they remind you of the valiant part the regiment has played in the history of your land. May they remind you, too, that the future of the Black Watch is in your hands. I'm confident that you will cherish with pride and devotion the colors that I have entrusted to your keeping, and that you will guard them safe and serve them well.
The Canadian Black Watch has carried out a variety of duties through war and in peacetime. In the 1950s and 60s, a new identity became known for the Canadian soldier, a role as diplomat and keeper of the peace. This was nowhere more effective than in the island nation of Cyprus, where the Black Watch of Canada has twice served as intermediary between the warring Turkish and Greek factions. There, in the mountains of Kyrenia and the streets of Nicosia, some jobs of diplomacy were far removed from military routine.
Well, here in Cyprus, we have the only establishment which allows for an economics officer in the Canadian forces. And the job I have is basically to act as an intermediary or catalyst between Greek and Turkish Cypriots, so that those areas where they cannot agree upon, or those areas where no one is doing anything, we can try and improve the economy of Cyprus for the betterment of both Greek and Turkish Cypriots. Now, this ranges from everything from minor agricultural problems, for instance, a Turkish Cypriot cultivating land which belongs to a Greek Cypriot, and the Greek Cypriot can't go near it because it's located in Turkish-controlled area. We try and straighten matters out like that. Or it can range to anything as important as reactivating a whole industry or starting an industry where there, again, are both communities in Cyprus are involved. An officer in infantry, in the Black Watch especially, I suppose, is supposed to be flexible. Actually, although this isn't an army infantry job, it's almost a civilian job where you wear a uniform. It's the most interesting job I've had in my life, and adapting to it, as long as you have a little bit of common sense and diplomacy, it's with your army background, it's quite easy to do. We've had just recently one of our soldiers was killed, and we are well in Cyprus on active duty. He was killed. He fell from one of the mountain outposts. It would seem, as things go now, he would be the last casualty we've had in active service. It seemed a little bit pathetically ironic to me that here we are in the Black Watch, and with all our McLeans and McLeods and McCullens, but this boy was just as Black Watch as any of us, but his name was LaRue, and he was a French-speaking Canadian. Doesn't really matter what happens to me militarily, there'll always be part of me that's Black Watch. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I think I joined the regiment rather blindly. I'm not much of a flag waver, but certainly the regiment means a great deal to me.
Well, of course, being Black Watch, we aren't perhaps all that happy. But there are good reasons for it, which I think we all understand, and we will, of course, be very loyal to the new regiment as we were with the Black Watch. I can't think of a better way to go out than perhaps working for peace in a UN role such as this, which is really operational, and where the man, I think, feels that he is doing a very viable and worthwhile job.
Well, I think you're speaking to rather an unusual case. I've been born and raised in the traditions of the Black Watch on both sides of my family. My father joined the 13th Battalion in the First War as a private soldier and came home as a company commander. So therefore I'm the second McFarland to command this battalion. He later went on to command a militia battalion just prior to the Second World War. And on my mother's side, my grandfather was a regimental commandant, as was my uncle. So I'm steeped in the Black Watch tradition from the time I was born, and feel very strongly about it, naturally. It's not a new role to the militia here in Montreal, because the regiment was founded here, and until 1953, the Canadian Black Watch really was a militia unit, which mobilized regular force battalions in wartime. We feel very conscious of the responsibility to carry on the Black Watch name because of the tremendous record our two regular force battalions have made for themselves in their short period in the regular force. The people are far more conscious of Black Watch than they ever were before.
Juggler, on the attack! this is how it ends for 1st and 2nd Battalion here at Camp Gagetown, New Brunswick, in a blaze of color and pageantry. This is the final trooping of the Queen's and regimental colors as they are paraded before the troops for the last time. Canada will, as of June 30th, no longer have a Highland Regiment on the regular order of battle. There is a sadness surrounding these ceremonies today. It is felt by all ranks, and by the spectators too, many of whom have served in the Black Watch, in peace and in war. Both battalions parading today will form the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, and will be commanded by Lieutenant Colonel G.S. Morrison, the parade commander. The music today is being supplied by a military band under Captain Terry Barnes, and of course the pipes and drums of the Black Watch. Something of the order of 300 men will parade here today. Party moving to their positions at the far end of the parade ground. This is called Call in the Officers. There are 4 guards of approximately 50 men each, and the officers associated with each are now advancing in slow time toward their guards. The composite band idea has been tried before, but it was notably successful in Canada's centennial year, when the pipes and drums of the 2nd Battalion, Black Watch, mixed with many other band members from across Canada to form the Centennial Armed Forces Band. The parade is awaiting the arrival now of the colonel of the regiment, Colonel J.G. Bourne. We should point out that this entire trooping ceremony takes something of the order of 1 hour and 20 minutes, so obviously we can't bring you the entire ceremony. Colonel Bourne arrives with his aides and advances to the reviewing stand. Many civic and provincial dignitaries, and on Colonel Bourne's left is General Turcotte, who commands Mobile Command.
Royal Highland Regiment of Canada, General Salute, please and march!
There you see Colonel Bourne taking the salute from his regiment.
Shoulder! March! Order! March!
At this point, the parade commander, Lieutenant Colonel G.S. Morrison, advances to the reviewing stand, and he will ask Colonel Bourne if he would like to inspect his regiment.
Colonel Bourne, I am pleased to report that despite the inclement weather, the spirits of your regiment are high. Sir, we would be very honored if you would inspect your regiment today.
Thank you very much, Colonel Morrison.
Pipes and drums strike up. The aides to camp and the two battalion commanding officers, Colonel Morrison and Colonel McLeod, accompany Colonel Bourne as he moves down the ranks. He stops from time to time to have a chat with one or two members of the troops. I'm told that ordinarily he'll be looking at medals, and when he sees one that either interests him or matches one of his own, he's allowed to stop and have a word with that man, perhaps exchange notes as to where they served, what month, what year, probably in the Second World War, since most of Colonel Bourne's active service time was during the Second World War. As a matter of fact, he spent some time in the Devil's Brigade, about which a movie was made. And I'm given to understand from people who have seen it and who were members of the Devil's Brigade that it was a reasonably representative film of the escapades of some very highly trained and very efficient fighting men.
The Black Watch, Royal Highland Regiment of Canada, troop!
Now we come to the big moment, the trooping of the regimental colors and the Queen's colors. The original colors were presented in 1862, and 100 years later, the ones you are looking at now were presented.
At open order, and word! At!
This is the escort to the color, the officers who have been assigned to carry the Queen's color and the regimental colors. Each battalion has its own Queen's and regimental color. They are the responsibility of the battalion, and they're normally kept in the officers' mess. Queen's color is always on the left, and the regimental color is on the right as you look at them. And of course, the regimental color is the one whereupon is inscribed the battle honors that the regiment has acquired. Queen's color is presented. Queen's colors have been received by the regimental sergeant majors. Chief Warrant Officer Don Reekie and Chief Warrant Officer Gord Pyatt. They will present then to the officers who've been assigned to carry the Queen's color during the trooping. Now the same procedure again. This time the RSMs will pick up the regimental colors and deliver them to the carriers. 1 week from today, these colors will be laid up in the Church of St. Andrew and St. Paul on Sherbrooke Street in Montreal, the regimental church. This trooping ceremony dates to the 16th century. The color was usually placed in an ensign's quarters for safekeeping at the end of a parade or the day's fighting. Originally it was called lodging the color. However, in 1775, it was incorporated into the regular guard mounting parade of the Foot Guards, and gradually trooping ousted lodging. Colors are paraded before the troops so that they will all recognize them as a rallying point in battle. That is the significance. And, of course, the colors are considered to be the very heart and soul of the regiment.
To the colors! Prisoners!
There's the salute to the colors.
Escort to the colors! Colors!
Now try to always fight the back white.
Color party was made up of sergeants. Colors are normally never touched or carried except by an officer. However, the exception is during the trooping, where the emblem is put in charge of a sergeant. Presumably it was intended as a token of trust in the senior non-commissioned officers.
Escort to the colors! Change direction left! Fire! March! Whoa! March!
And the trooping of the colors begins. The colors officers will parade the colors before the front rank of the troops, and the escort for the colors will march between the two files. The custom of laying up the colors also has a notable history behind it. Due to the reverential attitude toward the colors and their symbolic significance and historical association, they must be placed in a sacred or honored building. This ceremony is the most significant act in the retirement process. In it, the colors are physically taken away from the battalion and placed in the custody of the church. The soldiers have them no longer. The symbolic spirit of the battalion has then been laid to rest. The church has accepted the responsibility of safeguarding the colors until such time as the units concerned are recalled to active duty. And these colors of the 1st and 2nd Battalions will be placed in the Church of St. Rune St. Paul in Montreal next week, on June the 14th. The regiments, including the 3rd Battalion, Army Cadets, and the Black Watch Associations, will parade at that time. Something in mythology to the effect that rain always attends those earthly events of which the gods disapprove. And certainly it has been a very wetting day here today. You see Colonel Bourne taking the salute as the colors are paraded by. It's a sad day, in fact, and it's being marked by somber weather. Around the perimeter of the parade square, you see flying St. Andrew's flag with an outline of the regimental badge in the center.
The Black Watch, Royal Highland Regiment of Canada, will march past in slow and quick time. Fire up! Slow! March!
Colonel Morrison, of course, has been rehearsing this for the last couple of days, and he indicated that he was just a little doubtful as to whether or not his throat would hold out until the ceremony was completed, but it seems to be in magnificent shape. There you see the parade commander, the deputy parade commander, the color officers, and the escort for the color, marching past the reviewing stand, where the salute is being taken by the colonel of the regiment, Colonel Bourne. And at this time, the colors are let fly, and only at this time. Once past the reviewing stand, the color officer will capture the flag again. And hold it tightly to the pike. Ceremony, added to, of course, by the magnificent uniforms. Royal Stuart kilts, not Stuart clan, but a royal tartan worn by the pipers and the drummers. The red hackle has an interesting history and mystery about it. There's an unproven legend dating to 1795 to the effect that the 11th Light Dragoons broke in a cavalry charge, leaving 2 guns behind. General Sir David Dundas shouted to the 42nd, "For God's sake and for the sake of our country, retake those guns." Because they retook the guns, the Black Watch has worn the dragoon hackle. Another story was that the troops in North America, somewhere around 1789, stuck red feathers in their bonnets as an adornment. This is probably the true legend. Royal Highland Regiment of Canada, because of the red hackle being an alleged honor, did not wear it until after the First World War. They won it in the Second Battle of Ypres and were asked by the Black Watch to wear it.
Royal Highland Regiment of Canada will advance in review order.
This advance and review order used to be the last of 18 complicated maneuvers which a battalion had to perform when being tested for battle.
Your regiment would be privileged if you would speak to us at this time.
Thank you very much, Colonel Morrison.
May I stand the regiment at ease, sir?
Please do.
Black Watch! Stand up! Hey!
To Colonel Morrison, Colonel MacLeod, the officers, warrant officers, non-commissioned officers, and men of the Black Watch, I would like to offer our heartiest congratulations for the excellent showing you have made today, particularly in this rather nasty weather. This might be considered a sad occasion, as it will be the last time these splendid Black Watch battalions will troop their colors. It might even be more sad when we realize that the regular component of Canada's armed forces will no longer have a Highland Regiment in the order of battle. However, this is not a day to be gloomy or sad. It is a day where you should rejoice in the fact that you have belonged to the best regiment in Canada for many, many years.
You should rejoice in the fact that your achievements have been second to none. You should rejoice in the fact that your training, discipline, and spirit gained while serving in this regiment will be of great help to you in the furtherance of your military careers. Once again, I'd like to offer our heartiest congratulations to all of you for this splendid parade this afternoon. You deserve great credit, and best of luck to you all.
There were messages, too, today from the parent regiment in Scotland and from the Colonel-in-Chief of the regiment, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother.
Black Watch, Royal Highland Regiment of Canada, to your colors, Brigade!
Now the colors are being marched off and seen for the last time by the men of 1st and 2nd Battalions, the Black Watch of Canada. Their next and last public appearance will be at the laying up ceremonies in Montreal on the 14th of June. This is a very sad moment. And there are a great many people here today whose emotions are very definitely on display. I noticed, too, at least 4 non-parading officers black armbands, and the same thing on 3 or 4 civilians, obviously represented at one stage. There's Colonel Sharp, honorary colonel of the 3rd Battalion, and Colonel Bourne taking the final salute. Colonel Morrison now turns the parade back to the Regimental Sergeant Major, Chief Warrant Officer Reiki.
And inward,
So the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the Royal Highland Regiment of Canada, the Black Watch, say goodbye to their colors. And Canada says goodbye to one of its most illustrious infantry regiments. Honors gathered and their duty done. But the tremendous spirit that many generations of our fighting sons have engendered will live on in the memories of those who have served their country in this regiment and perpetuated in the militia their traditional role in time of peace.
The disbandment of the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the Black Watch simply means that the Canadian Armed Forces are losing our 2 regular battalions. The 3rd Militia Battalion will continue to serve the Canadian Armed Forces here in Montreal. The Black Watch really were the representative infantry regiment for the maritime provinces. And inasmuch as most of our men come from the Maritimes, there are a great number of Scottish descent. there is a Scottish fact in Canada. Esprit de corps is built on tradition. Tradition in a regiment is based on the accomplishment of the men of that regiment over a period of time. We in the Black Watch think, and I believe we have, kept our tradition shining. And as a result, there has always been a great esprit de corps. Esprit de corps produces an efficient unit or an efficient regiment. Well, the Black Watch will continue to serve Canada in its role in the militia. Since 1862, the Black Watch has been a militia regiment. I believe that the role of the militia today is in support of mobile command, apart from its traditional role of aid to the civil power in internal security. Well, naturally, we're all very disappointed that these two fine battalions will no longer continue in the regular component of Canada's armed forces. They have done a wonderful job for the past 17 years, serving in the NATO forces and the United Nations peacekeeping forces, and at home here in Canada as part of Mobile Command. However, with the reorganization, changes have to be made, and the regiment must accept the decision that has been reached.